It's Hard to Believe, the podcast that brings you absolutely true but very hard to believe stories. I'm your host, G Wiz. Now let's get into it.
It's hard to believe, but no fewer than 11 astronauts have publicly stated that they have personally had unexplained encounters with UFOs. That is not counting the sightings that NASA has explained away as space junk or ice crystals. For example, Colonel Gordon Cooper, who was the youngest astronaut in the original Mercury program, he made the following claim.
This was in the early 1950s when I was flying fighters in Germany, and these objects were coming over our base that appeared to be the same kind of formations that we fly in our fighters. On occasion, their movements were more erratic than ours, which meant they could really accelerate laterally and accelerate fore and aft more readily than we do. But we felt that they looked very much like high-flying fighters, except they had no wings. They were certainly higher and faster than any airplanes we know of here on Earth at that particular time, and they certainly appeared to be saucer-shaped and metallic.
Colonel Cooper also claimed that later, in 1957, at Edwards Air Force Base, he and two others witnessed a strange-looking saucer-like aircraft. It hovered over them, then landed 50 yards away using 3 extended landing gears. When they approached for a closer look, the craft took off. It did not make a sound, even while landing or taking off. Despite regularly observing experimental aircraft at the base, this encounter truly unnerved the men. Cooper claims to have captured high-quality images of the encounter, but he said that after handing over the negatives, which he developed and personally inspected, to the Air Force, he was never able to track down the film again. Until his death in 2004, he maintained that the U.S. government was covering up information about UFOs. In 1965, Gemini 4 pilot Jim McDivitt spotted what he described as a white cylindrical shape with a white pole sticking out of one corner. He captured 2 pictures of it. NASA Ground Control explained it as being the second stage of the Titan II rocket that had carried them into orbit. Now, while McDivitt did not support this theory, he did say that the object seemed to be an unknown but man-made piece of space debris. There's speculation that it was actually a secret military satellite. Later, in December of 1965, astronauts Wally Schirra and Tom Stafford notified ground control that they were tracking an object in polar orbit. Houston snapped to attention as they heard the astronauts describe seeing a command module being pulled by 8 smaller modules in front. And oh yeah, the command module was dressed in a red suit. The sound of jingle bells being played on a harmonica could then be heard, and Mission Control realized this was a Christmas prank. Many other astronauts don't think UFO sightings are a joke, though, like astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who happened to be the 6th man to walk on the moon. Mitchell often spoke publicly about his belief that UFOs were indeed alien visitors and that governments around the world were working with and covering up information about aliens. While Mitchell never claimed to see any UFOs or aliens himself, cosmonauts Vladimir Kovalenuk and Viktor Savinnik saw what they described as a boat or melon-shaped object following its own orbit in space in 1981. The men say that the object separated into 2 connected parts, like a dumbbell, and before they could photograph it, the object exploded silently and left behind a puff of golden sparkly smoke. Kovalenuk also stated that the specialists in charge of monitoring radioactivity registered a significant spike during the event. In all, the men witnessed 3 different orbs that behaved similarly. They're not the only cosmonauts with an out-of-this-world story. In 1984, 3 cosmonauts aboard the Soyuz 7 space station were alerted by an orange glow that penetrated the entire space station. At first, the astronauts believed there must have been an explosion and fire, but quickly realized that was not the case. As they peered through the lookouts, they were practically blinded by the brightness. After a few seconds, they could make out what they described as 7 huge angels floating outside in space. Yes, they said angels. These celestial entities were said to be 25 meters high and 60 meters wide with their wings open. The cosmonauts claimed that the angels looked directly at them and smiled. After about 10 minutes, the angels floated away. We could chalk this episode up to some tainted vodka, if not for the fact that it happened again 5 days later while the Soyuz T-12 was docked at the station. This time, 3 more cosmonauts witnessed the giant alien angels majestically floating outside their vehicles. The beings were said to have circled the space station several times and then peacefully floated away. Upon landing, the astronauts were subjected to a barrage of physical and mental exams, which they all passed. Still, the incident was explained away as being a mass hallucination that happened twice to 6 different highly trained professionals who all saw the exact same thing. Hard to believe. Some incidents don't need to be explained away, though. In 2023, astronaut Scott Kelly, whose identical twin brother Mark Kelly is also an astronaut, recently described his UFO experience here on Earth. He told the story of piloting a jet off Virginia Beach when his RIO, that's the guy that sits behind the pilot, told him they had just passed a UFO. Kelly missed it, so he turned the plane around to get a look. He spotted the object floating in midair with no visible wings or means of propulsion. As they got closer, he could see that it was actually Bart Simpson. Nope, not another hallucination. It was just a party balloon of the famous imp. It's hard to believe there aren't more astronaut UFO encounters, but would you report one if you saw it?
You can find links and more information about this topic and our complete library at our website, hardtobelieve.blog. Thank you for listening. This has been Hard to Believe. I'm your host, G Wiz, asking you to please like and subscribe for exclusive content.